From the liberal Northeast comes a lone voice of truth. Honest commentary in dishonest times. Think deeper with Juan Newsom. This is the Cure Radio Program. This is the Cure.
Folks, today on The Cure, we have a friend back, Jon Henderson. He is an entrepreneur, author, just an all-around hustler. Thanks for coming back, brother.
No problem, brother. Good to see you.
So we want to talk about tonight, liberty versus liberalism, right?
Yes, sir.
And so we wanted to get some good distinctions between the two. I think that's the purpose of the overall discussion.
Right.
So you want to delve into that?
I can. So, based on the stuff that we talked previously, I think that one of the critical to quality factors for positive interaction at this juncture in the United States political culture and social culture is understanding the value of liberty versus the inherent fallacy of liberalism, right?
Yeah.
Because liberty at its core and base functionality requires two things that are very important, and that's personal responsibility and accountability. Okay. Yeah. When you look at every definition of liberty, when you look at 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, right?
Yeah.
If you're talking about that context, everything that happens in biblical terms is tied to obedience. He who loves me follows my commandments, right?
That's right.
So if we are going to talk about liberty and being empowered to be the best we can be as God created us to be, there is also an inherent give and take where we must subject our will and the things that we desire or crave or want to do to a higher authority and a higher standard than just our own personal desires and vices, right?
That's true.
And that mentality then is what creates actual liberty, because as long as I have respect for something other than my own ego and what I want to do, I will always default towards an answer that says, is what I'm about to do wrong? Is it going to harm someone else? Is there something that I shouldn't be doing in this instance that could cause someone else to have an issue or a challenge with what I'm doing? So liberty is actually the exercise within reason of personal responsibility and accountability to pursue your happiness within a guided set of boundaries that allows you to both serve something greater than self and realize your own self-actualization. And
Well, not to cut you off, but I always get this question from Christians, and you bring it from non-Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you described was the essence not only of liberty, but the essence of like Christianity, because Christianity is about self-discovery within the confines of what God designed, right?
Correct.
So how would you explain that to someone who didn't necessarily care for liberty as we defined it?
So you're talking about someone who subscribes to liberalism.
Someone who describes to liberalism.
Right. So if you subscribe to liberalism, you believe in a whatever is clever, I can do what I want because that's freedom. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you have no boundaries or guidance, no baseline to say this is appropriate behavior, these are reasonable expectations, liberalism is literally a source of rebellion. Okay.
Yeah.
Because everything in liberalism is tied to rebellion against God, rebellion against government, rebellion against the status quo, rebellion against everything that is an approved, acceptable, or recognized social norm, right? So everything in liberalism, if you notice, always requires protest to get the point across. It always requires a taking pride in something that has maybe no value at all, or something that really has nothing to do with pride and is more about personal expression, and is probably best kept to that individual's perspective and life experience, right?
That's right.
And so liberalism is actually its root and its core is rebellion, right? So when you look at that and you look at, when we talk about the foundation of this country, there are a lot of people that will confuse our founding fathers' intent of liberty for all, right? Remember, they were also fighting for religious liberty from the Church of England and from British rule.
That's right.
So our country was founded not on liberalism, not on rebellion, but against the overarching structure of people who did not recognize the inherent value of human life and the personal responsibility and accountability that went along with that. And we were being tied to a crown that wanted to tax us and impose rules from the crown from an ocean away that did not have our best interest at heart based on the things that they imposed. Because let's be honest, colonialism did establish rule of law, but it also established a conquer mentality in this country where we were destroying the natives that were here. The natives were destroying us. We were using up the land back then. We didn't have the technology that we have today. But can you imagine if, when we talk about rule of law, if there were no rules or limits for hunting and fishing, right? So people would fish streams dry. They would completely eradicate the environment because they wanted to stockpile what they wanted, regardless of how that impacted every other one of their neighbors that also depended on those same food sources and streams, right?
That's
and
right.
So when you talk about conservation, when you talk about the things that are the core of conservative values, there is no distinction between Christianity and conservatism, right?
Yeah.
Because
right.
in order to properly husband and manage and safeguard creation as God intended, you must first adhere to God's rules and understanding of what he designed mankind to be. And once you understand those values, then conservative values are basically a second part and parcel to that. They become a part of your nature because you are already doing those things. So when people say, oh, it was a libertarian philosophy that caused us to rebel, it was not.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Right. And libertarianism, they say, well, that's classic liberalism. Okay, well, liberalism is still rebellion, right? And when you look at the structures that we established rule of law, we established a constitution, we established, your Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. All of those things were built on a rejection of monarchy and tyranny by a distant elite royalty. And focused on the interactions between us as free people in society to include personal responsibility and accountability, which is the essence of freedom.
I always get in arguments with libertarians about the fact that, because they look at conservatives as two sides of the same coin of the Democratic Party, and that's really not so. Conservatism is there really to conserve our values, our laws, our Constitution as founded. And the problem that I have with libertarians is they're not interested in defending the Constitution, and I can take it issue by issue. Let's look at the border, for example. Libertarians are very liberal when it comes to the crossing of our border. Now, the whole purpose of the border is not to keep people in and to keep people out. The whole purpose of the border is establish order, is to protect our sovereignty, is to have some type of, there is in the Constitution, provisions for migration into this country. And Congress is in charge of that. And so libertarians, I have a big issue with them, and especially people like Gary Johnson, who are just like open borders. Like, we have the right to defend our laws, our nation, our sovereignty, and our borders and our culture. And that's a big issue that I take with them.
Yeah, laissez-faire works in Vegas, right? What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. You can do what you want. It's Sin City. You can have whatever kind of things you want. But when you're talking about managing a nation of multicultural peoples, when you're talking about establishing a rule of law that protects all rights of the individual, right, against the mob, okay?
That's right.
Because democracy is the mob. And when you talk about the things that we do to protect our borders, safeguard our economy, protect the environment, And you look at the current border crisis. I watched the news this morning and saw,
Yep.
more reports on the planes that we knew were coming in last August.
That's
Planes
right.
coming in the dead of night, dropping off unknown numbers of people and unknown intentions on their part to just automatically just walk into our country, and all of a sudden they're just here. What's
Yep.
their purpose, right? If you
Yep.
don't have a declared reason to be part of this country, if your first act of coming into this country is breaking its laws and disrespecting its established order, its standing as a nation, and the people that follow its laws, are you really a good citizen? Is there
Yep.
ever a chance you're going to become a good citizen? The likelihood is no. Right. And so, and that's why when libertarians say that conservatives and liberals are the same side of the same coin, I laugh at that, because they're actually part of the liberal crowd. Just because
Yeah.
they can balance a checkbook and play like they're conservative does not actually mean they're truly conservatives. Okay.
That's
And
true.
we know that because they lack virtue. Okay. They lack virtue on things like marriage. Most libertarians that I talk to, if
Mhm.
you ask them about marriage, when the debate for homosexual unions as government approved marriages and whatever else was going on, they said government shouldn't be involved in marriage at all.
Yeah.
Really? So what stops the 14-year-old from being married off to her Arkansas 30-year-old uncle,
That's true.
right?
That's very true.
If there's no standard at all, and our laws are designed to establish a standard for right and wrong and the baseline that has a moral implication. If you just disregard all of that, then it's a free-for-all, and there's nothing but chaos that comes from that. And the fact that they despise virtue and morality is very clearly an indicator they're on the wrong side of things. Another one of my arguments that are their arguments that I love just picking apart: legalization of marijuana, right? One of their favorite things to say is that, well, if we legalize marijuana, it'll generate tax revenue. So walk me through that process, Juan.
Yeah.
If I'm generating tax revenue for a government that I don't want in place to begin with, when have you ever seen government ever shrink because it received more revenue?
Yeah. It doesn't.
Okay.
It just grows.
So that's right. So their hypocrisy and the irony of their fallacies they're observable to anybody who's paying attention. Is that libertarianism, and you can go back to classic liberalism or even the modern day stuff. They call it libertine. They call it all these different names to try to distract, another liberal tactic, right? Renaming what is. And when you start to play those word games, you miss the more important factor, that they reject morality. They reject any form of state-governed standard baseline, even though they claim, they give lip service to, oh, well, rule of law is important. Okay, but you don't believe in rule of law. Otherwise, you'd understand the importance of having the law established as a baseline. You wouldn't,
Exactly.
and so their inability to actually see their own hypocritical fallacies that they support. We've got mutual friends that they post things from people like Spike Cohen and some other folks, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, here we go.
Yeah.
Because they're, I get it. Some of them are actually well-intentioned. I think there are some libertarians that are truly well-intentioned and just are looking for some form of liberty in a nation that it guarantees individual rights and liberties as a part of our framework in our Constitution. But you don't get to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't then turn around and say that the very essence of our rule of law and the way that we establish a free society is now irrelevant. Let's just be free and do what we want. You can't have it both ways.
Nope.
Right?
You cannot, and you have to, and this is where I get into it with some libertarians too. You have got to defend the Constitution. Like the Constitution needs constant defense. It was Jefferson that quoted his Tree of Liberty quote, which is one of my favorites. He said the Tree of Liberty should be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And that means a constant vigilance, a constant defense of the Constitution, to preserve to preserve the rule of law, to preserve the Constitution as founded somewhat.
Right. Yeah, and the libertarians that I talked to and had multiple arguments, but they would actually defend the Constitution, but they would only say that the Constitution is the law of the land, and they would completely ignore the 10th Amendment and the fact that the states have the right and the ability to impose their own laws at a lower level, which is not the federal government's purview, right?
That's right.
Those things that the federal government should not be managing are still left to the states or the people. per the
Yeah.
10th Amendment, right? And so the 10th Amendment was tarnished in reputation because of the whole use of it to justify South Carolina and the other states seceding during the Civil War, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so once that became tarnished, everyone thinks, ooh, 10th Amendment, bad juju, but that's really not, that wasn't the point of it. The 10th Amendment codified the boundary, the distinction between federal constitutional authority and powers derived by the federal government based on the establishment of our nation of laws, and then delegated other actions at a lower level to state and local authorities so they can impose their own, fines and sentencing and all that stuff for different crimes that vary, right? There are some states that still have the death penalty, other states have abolished it. And of note, the states that keep it have lower crime rates typically, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when you apply a forcing function to personal accountability and responsibility, or personal responsibility and accountability, it changes things in people's minds, and we failed on that across the board as well.
Well, I also failed in educating, and you mentioned the 10th Amendment, educating people on the 10th Amendment and what exactly the intent was there, and I think the states will actually, when the Constitution was first drafted and written and ratified, I think the states were in a much more powerful position than they are in the current day.
Right.
When you look at, the rights of the states, when you look at the fact that even in the federal government, the states had somewhat control of the Senate. We used to elect our representatives from the Senate in our state houses and send them to Washington, and they could be recalled at any time.
Right.
Before the 16th Amendment.
And all this changed when we started looking to federal government funding to fund state level programs. Okay.
That's right.
So because the states have smaller purses and look to the federal government to reimburse or actually provide their budget to them, we have become dependent on a centralized form of government that our founding fathers never intended for it to become.
Yeah, we're already, people don't realize, and sometimes I just, it makes me cringe. We're already somewhat unhinged from the Constitution.
Very much so. Yeah.
We're in the era of post-constitutionalism, and it kind of makes me cringe when I hear some Republicans talk about some of the things they propose and they plan and what they do. I'm like, man, we're already unhinged from the Constitution. You're just digging the ditch even a little bit deeper.
Yep.
By proposing or passing, certain bills. You have bills now originating in the Senate,
right?
Which was not the intent of the founders. And that they changed over the time. They changed the parliamentary rules in order to enact some of these bills. But you have bills starting in the Senate, ended up in the House. They're doing reconciliation and all other types of parliamentary tricks that weren't meant to really happen. Things were meant to start in the House.
All things being equal, we should have a policy in place at the federal government level that every bill must stand on its own merit. There are no ride-along bills, right? So if a bill comes with 15 different addendums and acts that are part of a larger bill, they always do this with the defense spending bill, right?
Oh yeah.
They'll attach some of the most insane crap that goes with the defense spending bill because they know that if they deny those elements of the spending bill, and they've always opposed a line item veto, that if they attach it to the defense spending bill, it's likely to get funded. So they've played this DC swamp game for decades now, and we need to restore. Number one, we need to have term limits. If you serve 2 terms in Congress or the Senate, you're done. It doesn't matter. Let's just move on, because the way that they get things done right now is that they build these alliances, and people say, well, if you vote for this, I'll vote for your thing and everything else, and they exchange all these favors. And the actual effectiveness of government and the ability for people to analyze a bill, evaluate the outcomes and say this is good or not good for the country and then vote accordingly, we've lost that long ago. So the people in DC are just making up stuff as they go. They're handing out 3,000-page bills 2 nights prior to the vote on the bill and then saying, all right, we're going to vote today. Really? Okay, let's start over, right? And I think that honestly, with the way our framework is in our Constitution and the current laws of the land, we already have a plethora of laws on the books. Every bill in the modern day should be limited to 5 pages or less because it doesn't need to say all that much. right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah, we're losing our freedoms, man.
yeah,
We're
but
losing.
I want to touch on a couple of the points that we wrote in our pre-notes, right? Liberty begins with the exercise of personal restraint in order to safeguard the virtue and outcomes within society,
Yep.
right? Without virtue, and you read my book, virtue is
Yep.
an essential element of common sense, okay?
That's right.
Because if you don't have virtue, you don't have the ability to identify the distinction and act accordingly between right and wrong. So if I have no ability to say something is right or wrong, then there's no way that I can exercise virtue in my daily life or to support someone else's living, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at that, look at everything that the left has done over the last 14 years, okay? Everything they've done has been designed to destroy virtue, to challenge those things that are good and right. And instead of taking that stand and saying, okay, this is right, science supports this, you know, even if you disregard the Bible for whatever ridiculous reason you might have,
Yep.
at the end of the day, the Bible is the most concise, complete set of excellent standards for daily living that I've ever discovered, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Right. I
Exactly.
mean, you read my 76 standards in my book,
Yep.
and I don't come close to the Bible. And in fact, a lot of my standards are derived from biblical text, just because that is the best book when it comes to basic understanding of human reality and living a positive, good, healthy daily life.
Wasn't it John Adams who coined the phrase, our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people?
John Adams or James? Yeah, it's John Adams. I
Yeah, it
want to
was
say
John
James
Adams.
Madison, but he was not one.
Yeah.
So if we don't have virtue, we don't know the difference between right and wrong, and therefore everything is fair game, which then becomes liberalism, right? Because my next point on that page, there is no freedom that can be found in wanton, careless actions. True freedom involves the imposition of limitations on self at the point where one's actions affect another person, right?
That's
So
exactly right.
biblically, do not be a stumbling block to thy brother, right?
Yeah.
If I'm tempting you to anger, I'm the one that's in the wrong, right? If you come at me already angry, there's a chance that you may be wrong unless I've already offended you, right? But if we're acting responsibly, we talk that through and we say, okay, hey, we've got an issue here. Let's address this issue and then move forward as you know, men and brothers, right?
Yep.
And we don't have that impetus anymore. Everybody's looking to figure out how they can be butthurt so they can sue somebody, win a bunch of money, and all of a sudden they believe that their life is set. And so we've made money our idol, we've made money our God, and we've traded away true liberty in exchange for the price of not only our souls but our economy and everything else that we used to stand for as a nation.
John, they used to hang the 10 Commandments in schools.
Correct. Along with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Along with the Pledge of Allegiance, we used to do that every day.
Yep.
I remember the 10 Commandments hanging in my elementary school.
Right.
Talk about moral and religious, and those 10 Commandments, whether you were a Christian or not,
those are universal, right?
They were universal. They gave you a guideline.
A Muslim will tell you that those commandments are in their book as well, in the Quran. Those commandments are there. A Buddhist or a Hindu will tell you that they have a similar list of commandments in their religion, right? So worldwide, religions around the world recognize that it's important to recognize something greater than self so that you can add value to society and serve something greater than self. Because when you do that, you become a better person, right? And then how we treat each other, right? Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, his wife, whatever. Thou shalt not bear false witness, right?
Yep.
So if you're not looking to take from somebody else, lie about somebody else, kill somebody else, or sleep with their spouse or whatever else, you're on good standing in every society. The 10 Commandments are universal, especially the last 5. There should be no reason that anyone would take objection with those, except for the people that are intent on inspiring chaos, agents of chaos and rebellion. The liberals, right? I mean, we've got to keep hammering that home, is that, the backlash of liberalism, a continual loss of freedom to satisfy an idealistic fallacy that is bound by human nature. The reason liberalism will never succeed is because humans are the ones enacting that freedom. right?
That's right.
Because humans are, this is coming out in my second book, right? 70% of human interaction and behavior is tied to self-interest, the rule of self-interest.
Yep.
Okay. So at least 70% of everything we do in our lives is tied to how it benefits us, right? And when you base your entire living philosophy and your government structure and your societal rules on self-serving imposition that imposes hardship, censorship, or a different form of relationship than equality on other people, you have already begun failure.
Now, sometimes our self-interest makes society better.
Sometimes.
Like, for example, when we start a business,
right?
We introduce products and goods into the marketplace. We hire people. We expand that business. We hire more people.
Correct.
It has a positive effect on.
Yeah, not all self-interest is bad. Right. Yeah, not all self-interest is bad, right? And that's the thing that I think, the left has become a master manipulator of words when it comes to identifying the fact checkers in Facebook.
Yeah.
How they'll look at the thing that you write, you meant the entire picture and scope of what was in discussion. They focus on the one little piece that came from 1989 that somebody said was different, and they say, oh, everything you said was false. No, not everything that I said was false. You don't get to discredit everything I say because one little data point was something that you don't agree with, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the part that we have allowed all of the wrong elements to be in charge of the narrative and every discussion for too long. When you have cancel culture as the thing that people fear the most in this nation right now, outside of inflation, possibly going to war with Russia and all this other stuff, when you have cancel culture that people are so worried about stepping on other people's toes that they refuse to tell the truth, that's a problem.
You see where they canceled Dan Bongino on YouTube.
Yep, I just read that before we got on here.
Yeah, me too. So things like that happen.
And did you see? I'm waiting for them to ban me from Facebook again. The CDC just said that a natural immunity 6 times more viable against the Delta variant than face masks were.
Oh, wow.
Right. So the CDC is going back on its ever changing guidance anyway, and saying what we've been saying for months. But how many times were you and I and other people that we know banned from Facebook for objecting to the imposition of masks and the vaccine and everything else? And once they come back and double down on that admission and say, well, the vaccines really didn't work as well either, they were just a symptom reducer, which we already knew that. They're gonna have to come back and eat crow again because the collective didn't win that intellectual war, and everybody knows it. I think everybody knows it now at this point anyway, right? With Omicron spreading it like it's the cold, and the symptoms are changing. At some point, herd immunity and the need to decrease the fear-mongering talking points to a zero level that's urgent right now. When you stop talking about fear and start talking about getting everything back in shape and then preventing this from ever happening again.
Yeah, that's a total crock.
Yep. So, but remember, it ties back to, what is that, my 5th point on there? Conformity within liberalism creates the collective, while liberty protects the individual consistently, right?
Yeah.
So the moment we forsake liberty for liberalism, we've created a scenario where the various tribes in society are now jockeying for power. And as long as you conform to the things that they claim are the best for you, they will empower you to grow and build and do what they want you to do. The moment you object to what they want, the collective becomes your enemy. You become an enemy of the state. You become an enemy of a particular group. You become the person that needs to be canceled and eliminated from society.
Well, you see that through not only through how they're dealing with this virus, but through the social justice movement in general, through the trans rights movement. You kind of see that conformity. They're pushing for that conformity within the collective, and the individual. If they have, remember Dave Chappelle, he just did a special not too long ago.
Yeah.
Where he actually, he had a very moving story about one of his friends that was trans.
They totally glossed over that, didn't they?
they gloss over the fact that he was talking about a friend that
Right.
was trans and
Well,
made it into something that, you know,
and the
where they
but
kind of,
the reason they shouted so loud was because they were culpable in that person's death.
yeah,
Why did that person kill themselves?
yep,
Because they were receiving backlash from the trans and LGBTQ community because the Dave's friend was supporting him, and they said, "Oh, that makes you complicit," right?
yep,
They
exactly,
they demand conformity. That person would still be alive today if it was not for the LGBTQ community,
exactly.
right? And so conformity creates the collective, and the collective is death, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So whenever you have groupthink, right, and then here's how lack of virtue necessitates the creation of overlords to manage what people should be managing for themselves,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So our laws are rooted in liberty, right? Our nation was founded as a Christian nation, and we didn't have a specific church, but the formation of our laws is tied to English common law, the rule of law, the Ten
Mhm.
Commandments, right? Oh my goodness, what's my buddy's name here? Who's the guy? Persian that had the Hammurabi, the Code of Hammurabi,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So all of our laws are based on societies and customs and traditions and laws that were rooted in religious doctrine to begin with, right?
Yep. Oh
So
yeah.
we were founded as a Christian nation, regardless of what the atheists and all the other collectivists want to say.
I
Okay.
keep saying this. I keep saying this, and people look at me like I'm
That's because they
I'm
never read this
crazy.
stuff. Yeah, but they've never read these things, right? If they actually read the Constitution and they read the things that we do, the fact that, you know, we swear in on a Bible for every politician that comes
Yep.
into our ranks, right?
Yep.
Every court session is opened up with those words, you know, so help me God, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the thing is that we recognize God in everything we do as a nation because we were founded underneath that construct, and we've succeeded as a nation because we upheld God's standards for so long, right?
Yep.
Yep. The fight for liberty is actually a fight for God and righteousness. Okay. The fight for liberalism is rebellion against God and righteousness, and that's evidenced by the outcomes that liberalism produces.
I challenge people. I say, look, if you don't think we are a Christian nation, then go back to 1789
Mm-hmm.
and read George Washington's inaugural address,
Right.
and how he kind of, when you look at it, he kind of made a covenant with God, you
Right.
know, while being sworn in as the first president of the United States. Um, you know, go back and read that.
Right.
Go back
I'm
and
gonna.
read some of the biographical works of our founders, and look at how deep and rooted they were in their Christian faith. Go back and look at, you know, even though they looked at every system in the world that had existed at that time, they came up with, you know, this republic system
Right.
of governance so that the individual can be protected, because
Right.
they knew human nature, man.
Right. Well, and then there's Romans 13, right? We've got that on our notes.
That's right.
So applying the rule of law in conjunction with liberty, and this is where libertarians miss the mark most often. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So the authority of our every government, whether it's good or bad, comes from God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whosoever resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same, right? So when you look at that, all governments that are evil, that are corrupt, are also of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
When people suffer and struggle, right? Let's talk about slavery. Let's talk about something that people know is just a knee-jerk, that's horrible reaction, right?
Yep.
Everything that we've done since 1865 has been to eradicate and safeguard against ever having slavery as a practice again, correct?
Yep. Absolutely right.
600,000 people plus 400,000 from the northern side, which won the war, died in to protect freedom and eradicate slavery in this nation. We've
Mhm.
lost more lives defeating slavery than any other country around the world.
Yep.
So there are lessons to be learned from that. We have proven time and again that if we stand for the right things, that God blesses our country, that we have the ability to fight for what is right. And when we fight for what is right, goodness and peace come after that, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when Christians say that they shouldn't vote or they shouldn't be in the government or they shouldn't be in the military, I had people tell me that from my family. You shouldn't be in the military or law enforcement because that's no place for a Christian. You have to administer justice. Yeah, God is justice, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
God is righteous judgment, and if you are part of His hand in doing that from the letter of law standpoint, you are fulfilling the actual commandment of God that says you are part of the higher authority God has ordained. And we
Yeah.
also have an obligation as Christians that when a government becomes evil and corrupt, that we restore order, that we restore righteousness to the nation by overthrowing that evil government, right? And
That's right.
that is not something that should be taken lightly, nor should people in buffalo horns and painted faces defacing our capital be the leaders of that charge.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it is time to replace and remove and replace the existing structure that we have, that will come as a unified effort with people who actually have standards and values and principles, and most importantly, have virtue to back it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I always thought, and I hate to think about revolutions, but I always thought a revolution in this country would take place after a great deal of persecution, because it would take a group of people that would have to have the moral authority
Right.
in order to conduct a true revolution. Like, they've been
Yeah.
persecuted, they suffered. Usually after persecution and suffering comes like revolution.
Correct.
And it's not a knee-jerk reaction, like
Right. Like January
Congress,
6th. Yeah.
like January 6th.
Yeah.
That's not what an insurrection would
We're
look
gonna
like.
protest. Yeah,
We're
get us
gonna
on
protest,
camera. Look,
and
hey, I'm in the chamber. Woo, right. I
I
mean
got
that
Nancy Pelosi's laptop. Yeah, it's not
right.
gonna look like
That
that.
that that was a clown show. That had nothing to do with any form of insurrection. It was not legitimate revolution in any way, shape, or form. And it's interesting that we even broach this kind of conversation, because back in the day, you could have been censored, or that right now in old England, we'd already be in jail for having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
And I think Kanye said it right. Slavery is a choice, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm a veteran, right? I've
Hmm.
done my fair share of training and understanding the martial arts world to where it probably has made me more of a outcast to society than being part of the popular narrative, and I'm okay with that. But at the end of the day, I know for a fact that if you try to capture me, you may get me in the first try, right? I'll plant your fields and pick your cotton and do whatever else, but I'm always looking for the way to kill you and escape, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and in that regard, the same goes for the country writ large. All of us, and that's why I wrote my book, to galvanize the silent majority to say, hey, look, enough stupid crap is happening. Stop it, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what it takes to stop it peaceably is for everybody to stand up with a unified voice and say, that's enough, right? And we've got the silent majority cowed into these different corners and camps where the leftists have said, well, if you don't agree with our sexual perversion, you're a homophobe or a transphobe or whatever
Yep.
other phobe they can make
Exactly.
up, right? If you don't agree with our wide open borders and our our Trojan horse efforts to invade this country peaceably so that we can have the enemy within, then you're a Trojan, you're a xenophobe, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're this and that. And that's what they do. They use that language, they use their actions, and then smear the other side that opposes them as the bad guy, when in reality, the outcomes they produce will always be the worst thing for this nation and its
That's
people.
Yeah, and that's been proven time and time again.
Oh, yeah,
Whether it's slavery, whether it's segregation, Jim Crow, Black codes,
that's
whether
correct.
it's LBJ's Great Society,
The beginning of socialism right there.
the beginning of socialism right there.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
look
Social
at
security, I'm secure.
exactly,
Right.
welfare. I mean, it just when you look
That's
at
a big one.
everything that side of the aisle has done, it has been a detriment to this nation and holding it back.
I mean, but look at their motivation, right? At one point, they actually seceded from this nation and fought a war against their fellow Americans just to keep certain people in chains.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
who they are. Their end game is always power for themselves. They have no desire to actually empower the people that they separate and push into these little groups, because those people are called collateral damage, right? The LGBTQ community, the Black community, the Hispanic community, the Asian community, all of these pride movements, those are all collateral damage and are the first sacrificial lambs the moment that socialism or communism take full effect in this country. They will literally destroy them first and foremost, because they've done all the heavy lifting to protest and resist the powers that be. They know that those people are the first liability when it comes to changing this nation for something worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So and they've mocked us for years now and said we're the ones that are intolerant, when we simply said, hey, if you want to do something perverse in your bedroom, I don't need to know about it. It's between you and God. If you ask me my opinion, it's sin. Stop doing it. But if you're not asking for my opinion, carry on, and your repentance is between you and God, and I have no dog in that fight.
Exactly.
You tell me I have to tolerate you. You go and start talking to my kids in school about how they should accept your mistakes in life. No, I'm sorry. Now we have a problem. Yep. And I don't have to put up with any of that. Go shut your mouths and go do what you do on your own time and leave everybody else alone. And again, that they go back to that part where they don't understand that their actions affect another person. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Liberalism is about forcing conformity so that an end game of dominance is achieved. That is what liberalism is about. So liberalism is actually the antithesis of freedom and the antithesis of liberty.
Absolutely. 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 Where are we now? The imposition of a moral imperative through the rule of law.
Right.
I think
we touched on that multiple times. You're right. Yeah, because without rule of law, there's no baseline standards for society to interact with each other effectively, right? If there's no moral imperative for rule of law, there would be no such thing as sexual harassment, for example, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. A moral imperative says men should not look at women or ogle them or, grab their butts or sexually harass them or molest them in any way, shape, or form. Yep. That's a moral imperative, right?
Yep.
Because if you want to get technical, if they didn't hurt them, it's not really assault, right? It can be considered foreplay if it's wanted, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. A moral imperative says you should not do that. And that's what we strive to achieve. And it's interesting that the left, they love to choose these moral imperatives selectively so that they can create a wedge issue to drive people apart, but their end game is never for liberty and equality in the greater sum game, right?
Yeah.
Women's rights is another one of those things where they don't really believe in women's rights, because if they did, they wouldn't be allowing transgender male swimmers to dominate women's athletics.
Exactly. And it just turned Title IX on its head.
That's right. And that's the thing that I've been pointing out consistently from, for a while now, is that women, because they're the tolerant creatures, right?
Yep.
The gender role, that motherhood, nurturing, caring, empathetic, compassionate role that women play, that helps soften society for the better in many cases, is now being used against those women, because now they are the biggest victims of that particular paradigm that's going on right now, where men are coming in and just straight smoking women in athletics. And then how do you argue against it when you just argued for it for the last 5 years?
Yeah. It's
right?
Getting out of control.
But it's a catch-22 they created for themselves. Tolerance and empathy for evil create more evil.
Yeah.
Right. And a person who's pretending to be something they're not. You and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. What do we call those? Posers, pretenders.
Yeah, that's right.
Wannabes, right?
That's right.
Right. And so we used to ostracize those people. Now they call it verbal bullying, right? But at the end of the day, those verbal rebuttals to people's stupidity was a form of rejection that created some boundaries that establish, hey, this is your left and right limit for society. Stop pushing up against that because you're going to have problems. And those were necessary, right? Society has to be able to police itself as well. It can't all be based on government imposition of law. Otherwise, what we've done is we created a autocracy, right? We've created a form of government that's more imposing and overbearing than one that enables liberty.
That's right.
Right. So and that's been the left end game the entire time. They want to be in charge. They want to rule over other people. They want people in chains, because if you don't agree with them, they will either subject you or kill you. Right. Cancel culture, digital lynching. Right. They want to destroy you any way that they can.
Well, even those poor January 6 people, right? Look at how they just locked these people away and they deprived them of their rights.
Yeah, and I find it hard to defend those folks at all, because I think they're all morons. But at the end of the day, they still deserve due process, right?
Yep, exactly.
And I think the most disturbing thing I've heard about this is that Congress and its investigation into January 6th is overstepping the actual prescribed role and function of Congress. That's supposed to be a DOJ activity. There should be no congressional investigation into the activities of private citizens. That's a DOJ issue, right?
Exactly.
So any member of Congress that is on that panel, they kicked off the two conservatives that were on the panel, right? So right there, red flag number one. And number two, because they're holding these people without due process, without proper the chain of custody of the evidence, the review process, the judicial review and appeals process, none of that applies in this, right? So the government has already gone well beyond its prescribed role in this particular case, and Congress has overstepped its bounds to the point that they are actually committing subversion against this nation because they've overstepped their role.
Wow. So I got about 2 minutes. Let's close out discussion and set the scene for part 2.
Okay. So I think that to recap, liberty is not liberalism, and it can never be confused as the two. Liberty requires morality and virtue to be effective and to effectively manage society, and those who buy into that live a much healthier, wealthier, content life. Liberalism is the antithesis of liberty, and it is the exalted ego and self-congratulatory, actions that destroy society while claiming that what they're doing is freedom, and it's not, right? So liberalism actually is counter to liberty and actually destroys liberty because it requires a lack of virtue, a lack of standards and morality, a lack of actual liberty by forcing compliance on others who don't agree, and an ostracizing and a destruction of those who oppose, those who proclaim that they are championing liberal ideas and thoughts.
Very neurotic. Liberalism.
It's all, honestly, it's all demonically inspired, right? Who is the original liberal?
Satan.
Lucifer, right? He believed that he could lead heaven better than God, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So what did he do?
He
I can be as good as God, and then he fell away, right? He was cast out along with a third of the angels that actually believe that nonsense, right?
Yep.
And so that's right. So if you don't serve something greater than self, you already don't understand liberty, right?
Yep.
And if you serve other people or ideas that are destructive to other people, you only understand destruction. And that's what liberalism operates on, is actual destruction of society while masquerading and camouflaging itself as quote unquote freedom. And the reality is that their efforts are actually designed to destroy freedom, lest you agree with them.
That's right. Folks, I want you to go support Jon and his book. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Common Sense, a 2020 Perspective. It has some it's a book that you can kind of rally around as conservatives, and we can take the values and the illustrations that are outlined in this book, and it's something that we can move forward with. So Jon, I just want to thank you again. We definitely got to do this. We got to do round 2, part 2.
Correct.
so the audience can get some more. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Tell them where they can get it. Right, your podcast. It's on iHeart, Spotify.
We're on iHeart, Spotify. We are on Apple, also on Google Podcasts.
There we go.
For now.
Right. Hey, common sense cure, brother.
Common sense cure, man.
Yep.
This is The Cure.